with asking if there can be a motion from council to amend tonight's agenda. So in light of the comments at the planning board meeting on Thursday, we are looking at making some amendments to the zoning ordinances related to the Princeton Shopping Center. So those are ordinances 2020-21 and Ordinance 2020-22, which were up for public hearing tonight. So my recommendation is that there's a motion to amend tonight's agenda that will carry those two public hearings to the council meeting of Monday, August 27th. Hold on one second, because there's more to the motion, and just we did get some comments on those for those ordinances, and we're going to hold those emails that we got ahead of tonight's meeting for the public hearing on the 27th. The second part of the motion would be to move resolution 2223, which is the resolution endorsing the housing plan element and fair share plan, and move that to right after reports, so that we can have that resolution as helping to frame the discussion for the rest of the affordable housing items tonight. Mr. Cohen?
I will move to amend the agenda, but I think you said August 27th, and I don't think that August 27th is a Monday.
Thank you. I meant July 27th.
I thought so.
That is, yeah, that's a better motion. Thank you. Glad you're paying attention. Is there a second on amending the agenda? So moved by Mr. Cohen and seconded by Mr. Williamson. All in favor of amending the agenda tonight?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, terrific. So we are going to start with announcements and start with Council President Cohen, if you have any announcements this evening.
I do not have any announcements this evening.
Okay. Councilwoman Braga?
No announcements tonight, Mayor.
Councilman Williamson?
Yes, just one. I'm happy to report that CP pool opened today. And what I heard from the Director of Recreation, Ben Stentz, is that things went pretty well. It was pretty well attended. They had some minor hiccups, but the staff was pretty resilient and was able to address all the things that arose. So, we'll be monitoring how things go to see if we need to make any adjustments in the near future.
Great, thank you. Councilwoman Niedergang?
No announcements tonight. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilwoman Prun-Lambros?
Just a reminder announcement that the Princeton Resiliency Fund grant program is, the applications are open and they close July 31st. So for small businesses in town, you can go to princetonresiliencyfund.org to apply. Thanks.
Great, thanks. And Councilwoman Sachs?
No announcements tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I just have a couple announcements. The first is that Princeton has been doing just tremendously well in bringing down our COVID numbers. So this past week was it was a milestone where there were no new cases for a whole week, and over the past 14 days there was only, I think, one new case. So that's really, it's really great, and it's a testament to our health department and to really every single person in town helping to do the right thing to slow the spread. And it's really important at this time that we keep things that way. There's just so much dependent on it. You know, the safe reopening of our schools. We have the pool opening. Our businesses are, you know, we want them to be successful too. And we just can't let this disease get out of control again. So as part of that, the governor has instituted a mandatory masking when you're not able to socially distance. And just to make it super clear, that means if you're in the central business district, you need to be wearing a mask unless you're sitting at an outdoor table and having a meal, because there's no real way to socially distance when you're walking down Nassau Street or Witherspoon. If there's any doubt, put your mask on. And it's important for our community's health and to make sure we can get through this thing until there's a vaccine. So thank you. And I think we've shown, I mean, the good news is that I think we've shown we can do it and really bring the numbers down. So that's great. And the other just quick plug for if you don't already get the emails from the town, I recommend that you sign up for those. There's a ton of information and then they come out 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you can sign up at the princetonnj.gov website. Are there any staff announcements?
No, Mayor.
Nope. Okay. Then we will move on to public comments for items that are not already on the agenda. So there's 2 ways to make comments as part of public comment. The first is to, if you're tuning into this through Zoom, to click on the Q&A button at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, or you can send an email to princetoncomments@gmail.com. And we've been monitoring the email ahead of the meeting and just want to check with Mr. DeShield if anything has come in the interim that would be part of public comment.
No comments for public comment.
Okay. Then we'll move on to reports, and I'm going to be a little lax on the public comment just because I know it's hard sometimes to type super quickly. So at the end of reports, I'll ask again, and then we'll move on. So for reports, just want to see if there's anybody on council who has any reports tonight. Ms. Niedergang.
Let me get to the right page here. I just have one thing I'd like to give everyone a heads up on. Next week, the Princeton Environmental Commission will be considering a resolution supporting an environmental justice bill. That is S-232/A2212, which requires the Department of Environmental Protection to evaluate environmental and public health impacts of certain facilities, such as electrical generating facilities, incinerators, sewage treatment plants, solid waste facilities, landfills, things you would really prefer not to have in your backyard. On overburdened communities, the definition of an overburdened community being a community where 35% of households qualify as low income, according to the US Census. 40% of households are minority, or 40% of households have limited English proficiency. When reviewing certain permit applications, this bill has passed the state Senate and will be coming to the state assembly. I urge those of you listening to, urge your assembly people to support this, and assuming that the PEC supports the resolution, which I expect will hopefully be bringing it to council at our next meeting or a meeting in August to pass. I think this is a really great initiative at a really good time. So I'm very excited about this.
I muted myself. Are there any other council reports? Okay, are there any staff reports? I'm not hearing any. Okay, so then, sorry, Mr. DeShield?
None.
Okay, so we're gonna move on then. Some comments have come in on the Q&A, but they're related to affordable housing, which is on the agenda. So I'm gonna hold those for just a moment. And we're going to now move to Resolution 20223, which is the resolution of Mayor and Council of Princeton endorsing the housing plan element and fair share plan. just as an introduction to this resolution and to the ordinances that we're going to be taking up tonight, I thought it would, this is an important milestone in our affordable housing planning. We're going to be voting on the housing element, and we have the public hearings for several of our zoning ordinances related to affordable housing and the introduction of some of these ordinances. And I think it's just important to take a step back for a second and reflect on what we're doing here and the importance of what we're doing. In our country, unfortunately, your zip code determines your destiny, and Princeton's zip code is the kind of zip code where if you live here, it can really change your life. And when we talk about affordable housing, often we do so in really sterile terms, and we talk about this many units here and that many units there, but every unit is someone's future home, and in that home is a family, and that family's life can be transformed from being able to live in a place like Princeton. And for sure, our community is not perfect, and we have a lot of work to do. And I think, all of us here at this meeting know that. But it's also true that living in a place like Princeton opens up opportunities that are life-changing. And I think it's important that we keep that in mind as we have tonight's discussion. I sound like a broken record to myself a little bit, but I just wanted to go over again the sort of three goals we had in putting together this plan. The first is that it's a plan that's rooted in smart growth. And that means the housing is planned for areas that are walkable to transit, to shopping, to services, and to jobs. And that has benefits, not just for the people who are going to be living in the housing, but also for the neighborhood businesses and for the community at large. The second principle was really thinking about how do we grow as a community in a sustainable way. And, it's when people think about being walkable to transit, shopping, jobs, I think the first image that comes to your head might be, you want to be close to Nassau Street. But if we put all of this housing right next to Nassau Street, it's not necessarily growing in a sustainable way. So I think the vision for this next chapter for Princeton is really new centers of energy. So certainly Nassau Street's always going to be a center of energy, but thinking about the area around the shopping center up to a 6 by Montgomery, and to start growing around these other nodes. And then the third principle was making sure that we weren't putting the housing all in one place, the affordable housing all in one place, but that we did our best to spread it throughout town. And I think we did an okay job with that. But I think in the fourth round and fifth round, I think there's even more opportunities to take a look at where do we have affordable housing in place in town, and where there might be future opportunities as well. So with that, I wanted to turn it over to our planner, Michael Laplace, to see if he had any comments on the resolution.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Actually, Mayor, you did that better than any planner I've heard, so back to follow, but thank you.
I just stopped my video. I don't know if I'm supposed to be on there or not.
Oh, somebody's coming on. Okay, I'll just keep talking. Before you tonight is a resolution to endorse an action of the planning board last Thursday night. The planning board endorsed the Princeton Community Master Plan, third round fair share housing plan. It's an element of the master plan. And the third round housing plan element and fair share plan, it was prepared by our housing consultants, Clark, Kate, and Hintz. And in a few minutes, Michael Sullivan will talk a little bit about what the element consists of. But it basically sets the foundation for the actions that we need to take to be in conformance with the fair share housing agreement that we have with the state of New Jersey. the plan will set, it's basically what we have to report back to the court on our agreement. So basically the components are made up of 3 basic areas where we have to do housing: rehabilitation share, the prior round obligation for affordable housing, and the third round obligation, which we're in right now. So basically, as you said, Mayor, we felt that not only was this addressing the goals of providing more affordable housing opportunities within Princeton, but the planning board was very comfortable that it's a very good smart growth plan, because it's directing growth where growth makes sense, where infrastructure exists, where we can get the biggest bang for our buck in terms of resources that we already have in place. There's infill development. There's envision new development where development will we really think will take off and create new gateways into town and enliven existing areas that already exist, and adding mixed use component to certain areas of the town. So the planning board was excited about it, as was staff. So I'm going to ask Michael to just give a brief overview of what the plan actually consists of. And then after that, we're going to talk about the 4 ordinances before you this evening that are part of the implementation strategy of the Fair Share Plan.
Okay, and then Michael, do you want to introduce Michael?
Yes, Michael, this is Michael Sullivan. He is the principal at Clark Caton Hints. I can tell you that the best planners are usually named Michael, so I'm happy to do it. But he's done a tremendous amount of work, him and his team, on this. And I think you'll see some of the creativity that's been really put into this process. So the planning board, as you noted earlier, reviewed 6 ordinances as part of the, going towards our plan for affordable housing. Tonight before you are 4. And they vary in location from Nassau Street, some overlay districts that Michael will talk about in a little while, to an area at the northeasterly part of town at the end of 206 near the Montgomery border, and some other areas within Princeton. So Michael, if you would give us a brief overview of what about the plan involves, and then after that we'll talk a little bit about each of the ordinances.
Thank you, and thank you for your time tonight, and good to see everybody again. I feel like I'm at a Princeton meeting every 4 days, but they're all good. So thank you. That was a great introduction, Mayor, and also Michael. I didn't plan on being too detailed about the housing plan element, and so that we can focus more on the mechanics of these ordinances so folks can understand tonight. But as has been said, the housing plan element is the official statutory plan element of your master plan, which is mandatory, and that is required to be adopted for you to be protected for zoning challenges. And it also is the implementing plan for your affordable housing strategies. And it was adopted by the planning board last Thursday, July 9th, 2020. It's a landmark plan, really, because it's the first housing plan element that has both the former borough and the former township combined in it. It complies with the terms of a settlement, which was approved by the court in February. And that's an important distinction, and Michael alluded to that, in that this is a key piece of the implementation of that settlement, because it really sets forth what the obligation is for affordable housing. And Michael mentioned rehabilitation, the prior round obligation, and also the third round obligation, but how you're going to do it. And there's a series of tables, and we identify sites, and there's different mechanisms in here. Suffice it to say, the rehabilitation component is 80 dwelling units, and that's fixing up existing units that are occupied by eligible low and moderate income households, to fix systems so that they live in good conditions. Then the prior round, which is comprised of the 430 unit RDP, which has been satisfied, plus a 223 unit unmet need, which is a remnant of the former borough's vacant land adjustment. And then there's the third round component, which is 753 dwelling units. So this housing plan has all the mechanisms in place to address these. And the mechanisms include zoning for inclusionary zoning, where a portion of the zoning, a portion of the development is market rate housing, combined with a percentage, usually around 15 to 20% of affordable housing. There are 100% affordable mechanisms, which are municipally sponsored plan components. When we say municipally sponsored, we mean that the municipality makes a contribution either in land or a financial contribution or both in a lot of cases. And there are a series of affordable housing developers who specialize in housing, and they would do those. There are development of group home bedrooms, among other things. And as has been said both by the mayor and by Michael, the strategies here really are related to smart growth with quotes, but also when we think about it as it relates to Princeton, putting these mechanisms in the right places, in the right context, and trying to shape them so that they fit the context and enhance the context for the long term. So the plan contains those elements. It also talks about the spending plan, and it also talks about affirmative marketing, and there are other plan components and manuals that you'll adopt as part of this that will help guide that. In addition to the governing body is required to endorse this because there's a financial component to this. The planning board can plan something, but the governing body is responsible for paying for it. So where there are municipal contributions or efforts made there, that's why the municipality must endorse it. So the planning board adopted this document on July 9th. With the adoption, there was identified through the planning board meeting a series of corrections to and clarifications to the housing plan element. And working with the planning board attorney, we have itemized those in a draft resolution, which presumably will be adopted at the next planning board meeting when they memorialize the resolution. However, I did send it so that it would be attached to the housing plan that came for endorsement tonight, so that the governing body could understand the full breadth of the changes and corrections to the housing plan element. That's really the spiel tonight. If there are any questions about the housing plan element, I'm happy to answer them. But this is a planning board document, and you're really just giving your stamp of approval to it. And there's a presumption that it's all been done in sync with the governing body. Hopefully it has.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions from council for Michael, or is there a motion to put the resolution on the table? Ms. Fraga?
I just wanted to move it.
Okay. Is there a second? And it's so moved by Ms. Fraga, seconded by Mr. Williamson. I just want to check again if there's any questions. We did receive quite a few general comments about affordable housing that I'm going to put into the record here, and then we can vote on the resolution. So I'm going to start with the Q&A, and then I'm going to move to the emails. So the first is from India Gupta. Hi, Mayor and Council. I want to voice my enthusiastic support for bringing more affordable housing to our Princeton community. I am so thrilled to hear that we are closer to providing more units for individuals and families in our community, and confident that this will bring Princeton one step closer to the equitable future we hope to see. Next is from Maria Huega. Dear Mayor and Council, I'd like to express my gratitude to you and the municipal staff involved in negotiating, seeking common community input, and putting together the overwhelming amount of revisions and new ordinances necessary to arrive at Princeton's housing plan fair share settlement and achieving this breakthrough for our community. The proposed plan is not perfect, but is a step forward on the path to a greater social justice, and is a step forward on the path to greater social justice and building a more fair and equitable community. Some major impediments have been removed by creating opportunities for more low and moderate income housing to be built in Princeton, thus allowing Princeton residents who are at risk of being displaced by the forces of gentrification and rising housing market prices to remain in place. This plan would also open the door to many others, including people who grew up in Princeton or work here, who would like to return or move in and enrich the diversity and resources of our thriving town. Lastly, there are many of our families living in substandard, overcrowded conditions for the same reasons, and who are unable to find acceptable housing they can afford. Opening the door to more and better housing is at the core of achieving social justice in Princeton and across the state. Thank you and keep up the good work. This is from Shukin Chan. Hi, I'm a resident of Princeton. I want to ask what the town is doing to increase affordable housing. I think it's very important to make sure that neighbors and families are not priced out of living in Princeton. As a member of Princeton Mutual Aid, I have worked with neighbors who lack affordable housing options, and this is unacceptable, especially for a wealthy town like Princeton. This is from James Cacholia. Has there been any discussion of reducing zoning restrictions and parking minimum requirements in order to allow for more housing options for Princeton residents, such as duplexes, townhomes, and apartment buildings? I think that if there's questions that come up, I'm just going to put a pin in those and we'll answer those all at the end, but we can definitely address that. And now I'm going to turn to the emails we received. The first is from Adelina Relea. My name is Adelina. I'm a junior in the chemistry department at Princeton, and I am also a first-generation low-income student. I've studied and worked in this town for a year and a half, but I may not be able to return to it because of the lack of affordable housing in this area. The pandemic has disrupted all of our lives, but in different ways. While the university approves some students to live on campus for the spring semester, by this point, many of those approved students have had to find housing near campus. And students who went home in March may have had changes in their living environment that make learning at home incredibly difficult. Now that campus will be opening to some students this fall and spring, these students have the financial opportunity to find housing near campus to support them through their studies. I am one of those students whose living situation makes it extremely difficult to continue their studies. Due to the university's reopening plan, on-campus housing is an option for the fall for me, but what about the spring? My recent searches for off-campus housing have been extremely disheartening. Even with the aid offered by Princeton, I have extremely limited options. I'm unsure if those few options are even a possibility at this point. Housing in Princeton should be accessible to all in its community. The prestige surrounding the name of Princeton creates the impression that all who live here are affluent with financial stability, but this is false. And I don't just mean other first-generation low-income students at Princeton. There are countless other low-income families living in the area that also suffer from a lack of affordable housing. They are as deserving of financial security as anyone else. Find your humanity and realize that we were not all born with the same financial privileges. In a country that supports the notion that all people are capable of success so long as they work hard, why do we create so many institutional barriers to that success? Creating more affordable housing is an essential step towards supporting the health of your community. At a time when our health is not guaranteed due to the recklessness of this country's leadership, we need to keep our community housed now more than ever. I implore you to act with empathy and understanding. Thank you for reading. Next is from Summer Abiyad. My name is Summer Abiyad, and I am a resident of Mercer County. I am writing to ask for support in increased affordable housing in our county. This is an important part to increase diversity in our town and be as inclusive as possible. I know Matthew Desmond is a professor and writer at Princeton University and does a lot of work on affordable housing, and I support his work and want to see it reflected in our own community. Next is Kylie Radagon. Hello, I'm writing to express my support for all the ordinances being heard tonight that increase the availability of affordable housing in Princeton. As a member of Princeton Mutual Aid, I've seen how many people in this city struggle to pay their rent or live in precarious situations. We need more affordable housing. Next is from Stephanie Chorney. I want to comment on, you know what, this is, I'm gonna read this as part of the ordinance public hearing because hers is more related to a specific ordinance. All right, and then the last comment I have pre-printed is from Caroline Cleves. I would like to submit this testimony for inclusion in tonight's discussion about expanding affordable housing in Princeton. I grew up in Princeton. I consider myself a native Princetonian and understand the prestige and privilege this status confers on those of us who are fortunate enough to live in a town with so much to offer. I was raised by a single parent in the mid-70s who, because of her feminist commitment to doing it by herself, did not take alimony or child support from my father, who was a surgeon. So we lived in rented houses. And each year when the rent went up, we moved. Between 6th grade and my graduation from PHS, I lived on Ewing Street, on Moore Street, on Greenview Avenue, on Willow Street, on Littlebrook Road, on Pine Street, and on Jefferson Road. It was exhausting. My children are dumbfounded when we drive through town and I point out all the places I've lived. I moved back to Princeton 6 years ago, intending to become a homeowner with my then husband. When my marriage ended, I found myself re-entering the workforce after 10 years at home raising my children. I found a good entry-level job with health benefits, but my salary was nowhere near enough to have been able to afford a market rate rental. I was fortunate to get a new unit at the Merwick-Stanworth development through the auspices of Princeton Community Housing. That apartment was a lifesaver for me and my children. It allowed me to keep them stabilized in the midst of a divorce by being able to continue to attend their school and to maintain their friendships. It gave me the opportunity to save money to be able to afford food and clothing and soccer fees. My subsidized housing allowed my family to retain some semblance of what normal looks like in Princeton. My situation changed, and the happiest day of my new life was when we moved out so that another family could enjoy the same benefits we had been so fortunate to have. My closing thoughts are the following. Affordability is the foundation of a diverse and healthy community, where not everyone is a banker or a CEO. Princeton has changed so much in the last 30 years, and it's clear to me that the socioeconomic diversity, which was a hallmark of this town, has been lost. And with it, the ethnic and social diversity that makes the town livable, hospitable, and kind. The police force, the school teachers, the small business owners who once lived and worked here do not live here anymore. They cannot afford to. Was I embarrassed to tell people I moved my kids into affordable housing? In truth, yes. But what I was afraid to admit to a few years ago, I will publicly declare today. I needed the help and it was there. My gratitude is boundless, and I would want the same for any other family. Okay, that's a hard one to follow, but Mr. DeShield, did
Mayor?
any other comments come in?
There are more under the affordable, general affordability that were sent over to you.
Okay, and there's more that came in on the chat too, so I'm going to start with that. This is Elena Burke. I want to show my support for the progress in affordable housing here in Princeton. Affordable housing is an essential piece of a healthy community. Thank you for your work on moving this forward. I'm looking forward to see what more we can do to make equality a reality in this community. Nick D'Amanzino, I currently rent within an area that will be enacted into an HO1 overlay zone, and I am support of the amended housing plan element and fair share plan. I can speak firsthand that this area is a smart place to incentivize more affordable housing. It is accessible to public transportation, food, and clothing shops. And this is from Priyarkesh Somalaji. I'm a graduate student in the chemistry department at Princeton, and I have been here for 4 years. 2 years ago, because also of Princeton University's inadequate housing policy, but more primarily because of Princeton's lack of affordable housing, I had to move out of town. I want to reiterate that creating more truly affordable housing will not just benefit folks living in Princeton, but Princeton and the community itself, which must be understood as an organic entity that suffers and chokes from the bottleneck of housing income exclusion. Let Princeton breathe long-term. Please say yes to true affordable housing in Princeton. This is from Jennifer Cohan. I'm writing to express my support for affordable and middle income housing in Princeton. Not only do we need more new housing, we also need the existing housing to be refurbished. Any housing that is built should allow for low and middle income residents to utilize all services in new developments, which is not the case at the current Avalon Bay, where the services for fees are out of reach. Please ensure that all new construction allows for inclusion and voids any fees that other these families. Very best regards, Jennifer Lee Cohen. This is from someone who didn't put their name down. I'm really glad about the effort to build affordable housing. Watching $1 million+ homes replace what were once affordable small homes on Ewing, once occupied by seniors, for example, has been disturbing. What plans are in place to ensure that places where many trees will come down, for example, Harrison and Terhune, and in general for places targeted for smart growth, such as a shopping center area, will also maintain native tree cover, given concerns about climate change and loss of biodiversity, and allow people who will live in these homes access to the kind of green environment many of us here so enjoy. I'm also very interested in how plans will control for light pollution, avoiding many lights pointing upward and outward, given the light already emanating from the shopping center, and how the new building will be efficient and energy conscious. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm keeping note of some of the questions here, and we'll get to those at the end. This is from Jaya P. My name is Jaya Pandaya. I am a resident of Princeton and an international graduate student at Princeton University. For many students coming to Princeton from abroad, housing options are unclear and limited, and many low-income or first-generation students settle for expensive university housing since they do not know how to best search the Princeton housing market. I and many of my peers have to send resources home, and our budgets are stretched thin, even as many of us as non-citizens do not know how to or cannot access local resources. I want to add my support to calls for affordable housing in Princeton and ask that you make these as widely accessible as possible. Thank you for your work. Okay, so now I'm hopefully gonna successfully switch over to the emails that have come in. And I think I'm going to read these emails, and then I think we'll move on to the vote on this resolution. This is from David Ketty. Good evening. My name is David Ketty, and I live at 24 Moore Street, nearby to the proposed affordable housing zoning overlay on Nassau Street. I would like to comment in support of increased housing density in my neighborhood, the core of town. Princeton is in great need of more housing, especially walkable housing, such as that which my family enjoys and enables my wife and I both to walk to work. In this time of heightened concern over the systemic racism in our society, it is important to address how our zoning has been used to make Princeton an exclusionary place. I hope that this rezoning provides an opportunity to rectify this inequity and to enable for both more affordable and market rate housing in the heart of town. This is from Maya Aronoff. Dear Princeton Council, I have lived in Princeton for the past 5 years. As a young student and young working professional, I've only been able to afford to live in town because of financial aid for university housing. If I were working a minimum wage job in town, I have no idea where I could possibly live. I'm about to try and find a home in Princeton on a working salary, and so far it's been a complete failure. I've also spent my time since March helping folks struggling to make rent through Princeton Mutual Aid. I've spoken to single mothers working 80 hours a week to pay rent in so-called, quote, affordable housing, and folks who are spending so much on rent that they can't save any money for a rainy day or weather a crisis. There is no excuse for not expanding affordable housing because housing is the place around which a community resolves. Without that security, people either can't afford to stay housed, facing eviction and instability, or are working themselves to the bone to the point where they have no time for other things like working with kids, community engagement, leisure, etc. That's not a way to live. This town has so much money, and it's criminal to price out families who've lived here for so long and newcomers who aren't rich. I read comment objections to the new constructions, which included changing the complexion of the neighborhood. Please don't let racism and classism prevent moving forward on this vital project. This is from Jim Christie. I just want to tell the board how important that I think it is that Princeton make as big a commitment as possible to affordable housing here in town. As a citizen, voter, and taxpayer in the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood, I believe that having affordable housing in our town with a diverse group of people, in particular people of color and African Americans, benefits everyone. Thank you for your consideration. And this is from Carol Golden. I am chair of Housing Initiatives of Princeton, but I comment tonight not as a representative. Something got cut off with this email. Okay, I'm chair of the Housing Initiatives of Princeton, but I comment tonight not as a representative of the board of HIP, but as a private citizen. I am excited to see all of the ordinances on the agenda for tonight's meeting because they mean that the plan that our town has committed to in order to provide, I don't know what's happened to this email, the formatting, that our town is committed in order to provide more opportunities for people of all backgrounds and economic strata to live here can finally start being put into action. It is time for us to make the zoning changes needed and any other changes to make Princeton a diverse and welcoming community, not a tiny enclave available only to the wealthy. Okay. I just want to comment that I think that's a true testament to our town, getting all those positive comments about affordable housing. And it makes me really happy to live in Princeton tonight. So thank you to everybody who wrote in. I did want to just answer the two questions that were raised. So the first one was about parking minimums and whether any of our plan addresses parking minimums or reducing parking minimums. And the other was about tree cover and sustainable elements that were part of the housing. And I don't know if Michael, you want to respond to either one of those. Some of these we'll get into at the next
Right.
phase of this when there's
Correct.
actually a site plan. But I don't know if you had any other comments.
Yeah, and when Michael Sullivan's going to talk a little bit about each of the four ordinances that are before you this evening, and you'll get some of that detail. But generally speaking, we definitely address the idea of not requiring more parking than's necessary or appropriate in a particular area. For instance, the overlay districts along Nassau Street, it made sense to try to, not have an excessive parking requirement because that's a transit corridor and there's other ways of getting places, and it's walkable to lots of employment centers such as the university and other destinations downtown. So we took that under serious consideration as the various ordinances were being drafted. As far as the environmental considerations, we're always very concerned about having hopefully a net gain or at least not a net loss of tree cover. Some of the sites don't have a lot of tree cover. I guess the site at North Harrison and Terhune is wooded now, but under site plan review, we would certainly be addressing that under our tree ordinance.
Right, and I think the other thing that's important to mention is that we don't want to have additional environmental restrictions for our affordable housing, that we want to have those, I think this council is very committed to sustainability, as is the planning board, but we want to have those regulations apply throughout the entire town.
And there was another question about lighting. I mean, the planning board in particular during site plan is always concerned about concealed source lighting, doing, not having excessive lighting on site. So that we already practice those kind of design guidelines.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Sachs, did you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I was just going to echo what Michael said about the Nassau Street overlay, that I think it's one of the first ordinances in Princeton that's been passed with a very progressive view about parking. And so in that overlay, up to the first 5 units that are built do not have a parking requirement. I do think that's a first for Princeton. And also the ADU ordinance that we passed at the last council meeting also had, I Michael can give the specifics, but we spent a lot of time trying to make the parking requirements for that as minimal as possible.
And ADU stands for accessory dwelling unit. So it allows existing homeowner to add sort of an apartment within their property.
So basically, we, with the addition of the ADU, it was not necessary to add an additional parking space with one dwelling unit. I think, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but only if it was two bedrooms or more was it necessary. Is that right?
That's my recollection, yes.
Okay.
To be fully technically correct, if there were 3 habitable rooms, a parking
That's
space was
right.
required. If there are 2 habitable rooms, there was no parking space required. I'm not
Right.
going to what the definition of a habitable room is. If you want to know, you can email me.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I want to apologize to anybody who put their comment in afterwards. I'd like to keep moving the meeting. So the resolution is on the floor. And if there's no further comments from anybody on council, and I don't think there is, then all in favor.
There's one more
Oh.
comment in the
Oh, there is?
Q&A that we didn't.
Okay, I'll do the last one. This is no name. I'm a firm believer in affordable housing. My understanding is that Princeton is facing an imminent deadline or deadlines for submitting its fair share plans. And I was hoping the council could speak briefly to what those deadlines are and what the costs of not meeting them would be. In other words, what are the costs of going back to the drawing board on one or more ordinances? So I can address that, and I don't know, Kevin, you can jump in if I'm not being accurate here, but essentially we are going back to present the judge with the ordinances that have been passed. She would like some time to read them over before the court hearing. So we're planning to submit those ordinances a month before the hearing. There are going to be potentially a couple ordinances that we're working on up until the date of the hearing, so they won't make the deadline of being submitted a month in advance. But our expectation is that we'll have a chance to vote on them before the actual hearing. And that hearing is, I can't remember, it's August something.
August 12th, Mayor.
August 12th,
you're
thank you.
correct, yes.
Ms. Sachs?
Yeah, so I'm wondering if Kevin, our attorney, can speak a bit more in detail, because I know that, we have a number of residents who are very opposed to developments in their area. And I've tried to explain that we have a very, this is Princeton was at the end of the cycle, and that we're at the end of the time that we have to meet the deadline. And I explained that if we don't meet the deadline, there's something called builder's remedy, and you lose your immunity. And I've gotten a lot of questions about that. And I was not able to answer legally. So I'm wondering if you can explain, flesh that out a bit.
Essentially, as the mayor indicated, we are under court deadlines. This is the culmination of an over 5-year long process. This process was kicked off by the Supreme Court back in March of 2015. So this is not something that just occurred, and there have been a lot of planning efforts. There were court hearings, ultimately a trial on the obligation, and then we kicked off an extensive planning process. Unfortunately, because it was in litigation and it was subject to both settlement discussions and ultimately mediation, we were not able to do as much of this, or not very much of it at all, in the public process, which was problematic when the affordable housing obligations went to the court. But essentially, we are under court deadlines. We reached a settlement agreement with Fair Share Housing Center back in December. That settlement agreement was approved by the court in February. And then we entered into the compliance stage, which is why all of these things are coming before council now, is because once that settlement agreement was put in place, the court had very specific timelines and requirements that we had to have our affordable housing plan prepared and adopted by the planning board and endorsed by the governing body, which you just did a few minutes ago. And then we have all of the ordinances that effectuate that settlement agreement and that housing element and fair share plan. And so what council has tried significantly to do is to make sure that we had a mix of housing units and types, as Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Laplace alluded to earlier. We've tried to spread them out throughout the municipality. The obligation, because this is essentially 2.5 rounds of obligations, round being a 10-year planning plan. But this round has spanned essentially 1999 to 2025. Those obligations are very significant, which is why there are so many units that are going in throughout the municipality. Failure to comply with the court order and the requirements and the settlement agreement runs the risk that Princeton will not receive its judgment of compliance and repose. And it means, as Ms. Sachs has alluded to, that we would be open for builders remedy lawsuits, which means builders, property owners, developers would have the ability to come in on a declaration that the municipality has not met its constitutional obligation to provide affordable housing and essentially be entitled to trump local ordinances. And essentially that is done without, the input and the consideration of staff and professionals, because what the court is looking for in a builder's remedy lawsuit is, do you have a piece of property that a developer can develop that can help contribute to the municipality being able to meet its obligation? So essentially it would supersede the zoning requirements and the planning efforts that have gone into it. And so that's the risk and the detriment that you run by not adopting the ordinances that are required.
And I just want to add one thing to that. It makes it sound like we're being hauled into court. And the reality is that under normal circumstances, we would have been submitting our plans to a government agency at the state. And this is a long sordid history of, there was a lot of fighting in between Chris Christie and even predating him, where that department at the state was dysfunctional, and then it was disbanded. So there was no department for us to submit our plans to, and so that was the Supreme Court case that Mr. Van Heist was referencing. The courts took it over. Mr. Cohen?
And I just wanted to make one other small comment, which is that as Mr. Van Heist presented it, it made it sound a little bit like this 25-year period is all coming to a head now, and that maybe we weren't doing anything about affordable housing during the first 20 years of the period. The reality is that the municipality and the governing body have been committed to affordable housing all along, and we've been chipping away at our obligation since well before we knew what the obligation was going to be. It's just that as we get to the end, and as the actual number of required units was set by the courts, there's some catching up to do to get to the full complement.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I wanted to just make sure everyone's ready to vote. And all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Any opposed? All right, the resolution passes unanimously. And before we get to the public hearing, there was a comment that came in that was for public comment that I wanted to just read right now, and we can respond to it. This is from Ali Mukhtar. Hi, I've spent a lot of time sitting down on Witherspoon and Spring Street near the A&B bar, and there is a lot of pedestrian traffic at this cross section. But as cars come down Witherspoon, there are no signs or warnings for them to stop for pedestrians. There's currently no stop sign or any lights at this intersection. I am worried that pedestrians will be at risk of getting hit by cars at this intersection. I believe a light system similar to the pedestrian lights on Washington would be helpful. I am going to take that comment and we will pass it. We have a traffic safety committee and we can have them take a look at that to review it. But thank you for highlighting that for us. Okay, and so I'm going to officially close public comment and we'll move on to our public hearings. The first is Ordinance 2020-17, an ordinance to amend and supplement Chapter 17A, Article 11 of the Princeton Code entitled Land Use and the Princeton Zoning Map to create an AHO1 Affordable Housing Overlay Zone, an AHO2 Affordable Housing Overlay Zone, and an AHO3 Affordable Housing Overlay Zone, and the regulations associated thereto in the municipality of Princeton. And this refers to the affordable housing overlays we've been talking about on Nassau Street. And I wanted to just turn it over to Michael Sullivan, or if Michael Laplace wants to add anything to just describe what's involved in this ordinance. We have some comments for the public hearing, and then we'll bring it back to council.
Mayor,
Can I just jump in real quick? It would be useful, I think, for somebody to explain the difference between an overlay and an affordable housing zone. Maybe just a minute on that for members of the public who aren't familiar.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good. I was just going to say before Michael Sullivan discusses this and the other, there's 4 ordinances before you this evening that the planning board reviewed. I just wanted to note for the record that the planning board found all 4 of the ordinances related to the affordable housing, fair share housing plan to be in compliance with the Princeton Community Master Plan. Many of the goals of the master plan, such as pursuing affordable housing opportunities in this municipality, trying to create a diversity of housing types and opportunities, and pursuing smart growth principles, all seem to be met by these ordinances. So the planning board was endorsing their consideration to the council for approval. So with that, I'm going to ask Michael to start with Ordinance 2020-17.
Thank you. And to respond to the question regarding what an overlay ordinance is versus a typical ordinance. Typical ordinance is in place and it's as of right zoning, meaning that you have permitted uses, you have spatial requirements and other design requirements. An overlay ordinance is an alternative set of development standards and permissions that can be used in place of the zoning that underlies it. But in order to utilize it, you're required to meet certain conditions. And in the context of the affordable housing ordinances, the overlays are in place such that if you want to take advantage of the regulations that would permit you to develop under an overlay, you're required to do certain things. One of them is to provide affordable housing. So that's the difference between an overlay. It's an optional alternative, provided you meet certain conditions that you can use to the underlying zoning. Is that clear to everybody? Okay. Ordinance 2020-17 is an ordinance that creates the affordable housing overlay 1, 2, and 3 districts. And these are located, can I share my screen?
You can try, hopefully.
I'm disabled.
Mr. DeShield, are you able to help Mr. Sullivan out?
Should be able to try it now.
So before we go through these, I'm going to try to pull this up so folks understand where we're talking about. Hopefully you can all see my digital pointer hand, which is circling the former borough here. The affordable housing 1, 2, and 3 overlay zones are located along Nassau Street and a little portion of Wiggins and Tulane. The AH01 is located here. The AH02 is here, and the AH03 is here at the Jewish Center. So those are the locations. I'm going to put this down while I talk, and we can always put it back up. So that's where they're located. And these are two ordinances that are really looking at creating a mixed use alternative to the underlying development standards within the central business district. The AH01 and the AH02 provide for mixing of uses with non-residential uses on the ground floor with residential uses above. And the AH03 is 100% residential development, which is on the Jewish Center. All three of these ordinances require a 20% set aside of affordable housing, which would be integrated within whatever development and density occurs there. The AH01 and the AH02 require the retention of certain buildings and structures which express a historic character that is contributing to the existing district and have the potential for listing either within a district or individually. But so that the ordinance is created in such a way that it doesn't incentivize the removal of these good structures that are contributing to the central business district now. It's also consistent in terms of urban design standards with the existing desirable components of the Nassau Street district. It requires a maximum front yard setback of 10 feet. So it's pulling buildings up to the street, creating a good street wall and some character. And it also requires a minimum building height of 2.5 stories. So you're not getting single story, single use development. You're getting substantial buildings. Somebody mentioned before during the housing plan element portion about the relaxed off-street parking. We talked a little bit about this, but this is where it happens. In the AH01 and the AH02 districts, the first 5 dwelling units have no parking requirement. And in some cases, there may not be more than, there may be only 5, so you may not have any new ones. And then in the AH01, once you get above 5, there's 1 space per dwelling unit required. In the AH02, it's 1.1. These are reduced from what the residential site improvement standards would ordinarily ask for or require, which is a state standard for off-street parking. So it's a reduced standard. Within the AH01, there are no parking requirements for non-residential development, but in the AH02, the non-residential development must comply with the underlying zoning requirements because the parking is done by zone. In the AH03, the parking requirement is 1.3 dwelling units per acre, which is still less than the New Jersey residential site improvement standard. So it is trying to avoid over parking sites in favor of good buildings and mixed use development within this corridor. So all told, the AH01, 2, and 3 create incentives for development that is consistent with the historic development patterns in terms of building design, building location, and a mixing of uses, while also providing for the integration of affordable housing as a mandatory trigger to be able to use these standards. That's the summary.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Sullivan before we open up the public hearing? Okay, so I'm going to open up the public hearing, and I'm going to start with the comments that we received ahead of time. If you want to make a comment on this particular ordinance 2020-17, there are 2 ways to do that. You can either use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, or you can send your comment to the email, which I should remember by now, but I have to check all the time, princetoncomments@gmail.com. And we received 4 emails ahead of time on this. So I'm opening up the public hearing now, and we'll start with Stephanie Chorney from Race Street. I want to comment on 3 issues facing the town regarding new housing requirements for Princeton, Agenda Section 2020-17 to 22. I am in favor of the mixed affordable market rate unit plan on Franklin Street, even with higher density. I am relieved. I'm trying to figure out how I should do this.
Stephanie's email was, we're doing each one of the ordinances separately?
Yes.
Okay, so Stephanie's email was I think, supposed to be before the Franklin site ordinance.
Oh, okay.
And there's also
Yep.
one from Nick DiDomizio in the Q&A, which I think you already read, but it was specifically supposed to be read for this ordinance.
Okay. So if we can make sure that, I don't know,
Do you want me
Kevin,
to
I
read
don't
it
know.
quickly?
Well, no, I see it right here. I mean, we can put
Okay.
it into the record again if we need
Okay.
to. But it's figured that it's already been read, so we can just put that in the public hearing for this ordinance.
Yes.
And then I'm going to read the next three. My name is Elliot Wailu. I have been a Princeton resident since 2011, and I am a 2017 graduate of Princeton High School. I am a member of Princeton Mutual Aid. I am submitting this comment in support of any and all measures proposing to expand affordable housing in Princeton. You may not want to hear it, but you know it, Princeton is a segregated place. The building on Nassau next to Thomas Sweet is no longer the colored school, but racial and economic neighborhood segregation persist here, as I do all over the country. When I moved to Princeton in middle school, I was shocked to find out that some of my fellow Black and Latino classmates who would have attended Community Park Elementary School had been bused to Johnson Park Elementary School in order to remedy obvious neighborhood segregation. By the time I was in high school, I was far less shocked when groups of affluent Princeton residents protested the construction of affordable housing units at the site of the former Princeton Hospital. However, I was still naive enough to not understand that these advocates were proposing racist and classist policy positions that would maintain Princeton's status as a white affluent suburb. Now I know that they hide this racism and classism behind ideas like overcrowded schools, social services stretched thin, and zoning laws. I apologize because I am not able to attend the meeting live, but if anyone speaks against affordable housing using those ideological props, I hope that you will see them for what they are. Housing is a human right. Princeton, with all of its resources and wealth, has a moral imperative to create housing that everyone can afford, regardless of whether you benefit from the intergenerational wealth that many of Princeton's white residents rely on to afford property here. I look forward to hearing about new affordable housing projects breaking ground. Thank you for your time.
I have to say that as a Princeton High School graduate, we can be proud of. So
Yeah.
Most definitely. This next one is from Tinica Theo. I am writing in support of Ordinance 2017. Not everyone has the need, the means, or the desire to live in a freestanding house with a yard and a garage. Making it possible for several families, couples, or individuals to live in a multi-unit building would expand the choice of housing, leading to greater diversity. I think that more diversity would make Princeton a cooler, livelier, and more desirable place to live. While this ordinance is for areas around Nassau Street, I would request that you consider allowing for such multi-unit buildings throughout Princeton. I would love to live in such a building if there were one in my neighborhood. Indeed, there is an open lot on my street, which is perfect for building with 4 or 5 units. I can see myself moving there. A smaller home is easier to maintain, and I could stay close to my friends. It would be a sweet life. I hope you will consider it. And that's Tinica Theo, 79 Dempsey Avenue. Next is Elaine Guerin. Hello, dear council folks. I'm writing in support of multiplex housing on Nassau Street. I would also like to see multiplex housing extended to other areas in town where there are large houses or where there are properties where we could build attractive housing for empty nesters, single seniors, or young people starting out in life. I would just say in response to that last comment, there was an earlier discussion led by Ms. Sachs about an ordinance that we passed at our last meeting for accessory dwelling units that helps to start address the suggestion you have. So people can look that up on our website. And then Mr. DeShield, have we gotten any other emails for this public hearing for 2017?
Just give me one, let me just check. We do not.
Okay, So I'm going to close the public hearing on this ordinance and bring it back to council and see if anyone on council has any further comments or questions, or if there's a motion to approve. Yeah, Mr.
I
Cohen?
actually have a comment before we move it, which is that I do want people to know that we are looking at the opportunity to allow multiplex and duplex housing in other neighborhoods where it's currently not permitted. So there's a committee that's working on that called the Neighborhood Character Task Force. And that is something that, for those who are expressing an interest in that, that's something that we're committed to investigating.
Great, thank you. Any other comments or questions? All right, when I asked if there's a motion to approve, I think everyone's hand shot up, but why don't we try it again? Motion to approve? Moved by Ms. Niedergang, seconded by Ms. Fraga. And Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Perrone Lambros,
Yes.
Ms. Niedergang,
Yes.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Ms. Fraga,
Yes.
Mr. Williamson,
Yes.
Ms. Sachs.
Yes.
The ordinance passes unanimously. So thank you. And thank you for everybody who sent in comments on that. The next is Ordinance 2020-18, an ordinance to amend and supplement Chapter 10B of the Princeton Code entitled Land Use and the Princeton Zoning Map to create an AH04 Affordable Housing Overlay Zone and the regulations associated thereto in the Municipality of Princeton. And this is in what we're calling the Northern S2 District, which is up along 206 as you head towards Montgomery. And again, I'd like to open it up to Michael and Michael, if especially Michael Sullivan, if you can walk us through this ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Let me pull up the map so we can just orient ourselves here first. So the AH04 Affordable Housing District, as you said, is up. This is Route 206 as it approaches Montgomery line, and here's Cherry Valley Road. And so it's the Northern S2 District. It's coterminous with that. And I will stop sharing now. Okay. So the real intent of this is to, it's an affordable housing overlay ordinance, but it really seeks a transformation in this 206 corridor in this node as it approaches Cherry Valley, the northern gateway to Princeton. And it seeks to transform it from a real, mostly single use type, small scale, single story development into something that's more traditional, more dense, and more robust in terms of its presence along the corridor, such that it becomes a place. So that's the foundation of what this is supposed to be, and something that would fit within the fabric of the municipality. So what this does is it creates a mixed use development framework where you have ground floor commercial uses, but upper floor you can have multifamily residences. And again, like the AH 1, 2, and 3, there's a 20% set aside of affordable housing dwelling units, which would be integrated within these areas. From a spatial standpoint, it has a maximum front yard setback along 206 of 40 feet, a minimum building height of 2.5 stories. So you're ensured that if somebody's going to utilize this, they're going to create something that has some substance with respect to the street wall, and hopefully a street wall of character, and the site plan review will take care of that, with a maximum height of 45 feet. The parking, the off-street parking requirements are reduced from the RSIS here. They are 1.3 spaces per dwelling unit. And there's a storage component. There's 300 cubic feet of storage required within the building for dedication to the multifamily tenants, so they can store bicycles or kayaks or whatever else they're going to store in there. There's also a limitation on the residential street frontage at the ground level, such that it really seeks to have the non-residential be more pronounced at the ground level. So there's a 10% allowance for residential use at the ground floor so that the non-residential uses get that visibility at the street level. And that's where the activity could be here. That's really it.
Thank you. And I just wanted to make a secondary comment to that, which is I think when we were first talking about this zone and maybe a neighboring one, there were some comments that this was on the edge of Princeton and therefore in the middle of nowhere. And when you think about commercial areas, there's actually, I think Montgomery is putting a lot of investment into a commercial area that's very close to where this is located. So, you know, be adding commercial, but really tying into that node up there. So even though it's on the edge of town, doesn't mean that you fall off the map when you get to the Princeton border.
I think it's instructive to think of it not as the edge of town, but as a gateway.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you. Are there any
Princetonians? We support you, Mayor.
Are there any council questions or comments from council on this ordinance before we open up the public hearing? Mr. Cohen?
I just wanted to comment, actually respond to a somewhat critical email that I received this afternoon, suggesting that, you know, we're being misleading when we talk about this as a walkable node. And I just wanted to be upfront that we realize that it's now not a terribly welcoming walkable node. But with this changed zoning overlay, we're trying to encourage a kind of development that really will make it mixed use and supportive of the residential uses that are actually already approved to go in the area. So Briggs Farm is already there with a bunch of units, and one of our projects, our affordable housing projects that was approved last year, is on Harrington Road, right nearby. And so what we're really trying to accomplish here is to create something that is new and a lot more user-friendly than what's there existing. And I just wanted to acknowledge the distance between reality and aspiration here.
Thank you. Well put. Anybody else with comments or questions? Okay, I'd like to open up the public hearing on 2020-18. There was a question that came in on the Q&A that says, where on Terhune would this be proposed? And I'm going to hold that question because that might be a question related to the next ordinance, and we'll show that on a map when we get to it. But I don't have any emails that came in on this ordinance for the public hearing ahead of the meeting. And Mr. DeShield, just want to check with you if anything has come in subsequently.
No, Mayor.
Okay. All right. So seeing nothing more, I'm going to close the public hearing on this ordinance and bring it back to council. If there's no further questions or comments, then is there a motion to approve? Moved by Ms. Lambros, seconded by Mr. Cohen. And Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Perrone Lambros,
Yes.
Ms. Niedergang,
Yes.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Ms. Fraga,
Yes.
Mr. Williamson,
Yes.
Ms. Sachs.
Yes.
And this ordinance also passes unanimously. Next, we come to Ordinance 2020-19, an ordinance to amend and supplement Chapter 10B of the Princeton Code entitled Land Use in the Princeton Zoning Map to create the Affordable Housing Zone 5, AH5, delete Chapter 10B 364 residential cluster requirements for developments including moderate income housing in the RSM district, and the regulations associated thereto in the municipality of Princeton. And this refers to a site that's at the corner of Terhune and Harrison Streets. And again, turning it over to Mr. Sullivan to walk us through this ordinance.
Okay. So first things first, I'll zoom in just a little bit here. This site is located here at the corner of Harrison and Terhune, and it's an L-shaped parcel. It goes like this. It looks like one parcel here now because it's right next to the shopping center site, and this map is very, it's not a very detailed map. So, but that's the location. This ordinance seeks to allow for multifamily dwellings to be developed at 22 dwelling units per acre at this location, with a 20% set aside of affordable housing within those integrated. So it's an inclusionary development with a minimum of 12 units that must be produced from an affordable housing standpoint in order to ensure compliance with our housing plan element and our settlement. It allows for a maximum height of 45 feet and 4 stories for buildings. It has a parking requirement of 1.3 spaces, which is less than the RSIS. It requires 300 cubic feet of storage for the multifamily units. And recognizing its location relative to the shopping center, which is a destination for folks for lots of different retail and service needs, but also Grover Park, it actually requires that there be connectivity to the shared path that exists near the shopping center from this development in order to provide access to the shopping center and ultimately to Grover Park.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments on this ordinance from council before we open up the public hearing? Okay, I'm going to open up the public hearing, and we did get one email that came in, and I also see that Kip Cherry has a comment. So Kip, you can just type your comment into the Q&A there, and I'll get to it before we close the public hearing, and we can wait for you. So the first comment came in by mail from Matt Malesko. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. I am a doctoral student at Princeton University, where I study housing policy, including affordable housing. I listened in on the planning board's meeting last Thursday, in which several members of the public spoke out against the ordinances before the council today, but specifically ordinances 2020-19 and 2020-21, which I will address here. I don't want the council to have the impression that the only opinions about these ordinances and the other affordable housing overlays are negative, so I'd like to speak out in support of them. It is difficult to overstate the current affordable housing crisis within our nation, state, and local community. There are considerable shortages of affordable housing for moderate and low-income renters nationwide, but particularly for very low-income renters. The National Low Income Housing Coalition estimates a supply of 36 affordable units for every 100 extremely low-income renting households in the country, an issue that disproportionately affects our non-white and particularly our Black neighbors. In New Jersey, that number falls to 29 out of 100. In Princeton alone, there is a wait list of nearly 2,000 households in need of affordable housing as of November 2019. Princeton Housing Authority's wait list remains frozen. About 1/3 of all of our households are cost burdened, and nearly 17% of our renters are severely cost burdened. Research clearly shows that we face this massive shortage of affordable housing because of structural factors like stagnating wages and declining federal support for affordable housing, but also because of local decisions, namely exclusionary zoning, burdensome land use policies, and needless foot dragging with development, particularly affordable housing. Some residents may bemoan the court order that we find ourselves under, but it's probably unlikely that these affordable developments would be before you tonight without it. Furthermore, while it seems that Princeton residents are generally supportive of affordable housing, the voiced concerns do not match the urgency of the issue. Community consultation and feedback is certainly important and should be welcomed to the extent possible, but your top priorities should not be building heights, obstructed views, or open space, but the fact that nearly 2,000 households in our community are in need of affordable housing and cannot currently secure it. These ordinances are certainly not perfect, but we don't need perfect, we need action. Affordable housing development in Princeton is long overdue, and further delay is simply unjustified. Moreover, the council should see this as a start rather than a one-time commitment. Ultimately, more housing will be needed to continue to make Princeton a truly affordable, inclusive, and diverse community. I know you all have a considerable constituency of residents who support this vision and are willing to help make it happen. I am one of those residents, and I would be happy to work with you on this front moving forward. Thank you for your consideration and for all the work you do for this community. All right. Kip, you might still be working on your comment, and while you do that, Mr. DeShield, are there any other emails that came in?
No additional comments for this.
Okay. Oh, here we go. Okay, so sorry. This is from Kip Cherry and her comment. I'm going to read it in now just because it did come in. Sorry, my comment was on the Herrontown overlay. There are major safety issues for bikes and pedestrians along Route 206. We really need a commitment from the town to work with the state to install safe facilities. And I will say that that having this development go in is actually going to help us, I think, with the state on this front. And there was another comment that came in for the Traffic Safety Committee earlier about Witherspoon Street, and we can add this to the list because sometimes with the state, it helps to start early, asking for sidewalks and other safety features. Mr. Cohen?
I just want to comment that 206, our sidewalk master plan, actually does call for sidewalks on 206. You wouldn't know it because in a lot of cases, new development has been excused from putting in the sidewalks because they wouldn't connect to anything. But I think that that's the biggest reason why I think this overlay zone is going to help. It's not just about getting the state to support, but it actually will empower us to implement our pedestrian circulation plan.
Thank you. Okay, and I want to bring it back to Ordinance 2020-19. And while the public hearing is open, see if anybody else has any comments on this ordinance. And seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and bring it back to council again to ask if there's any final questions or comments on this. And if not, is there a motion to approve? Moved by Ms. Perrone-Lambros, seconded by Ms. Niedergang. And Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Perrone-Lambros,
Yes.
Ms. Niedergang,
Yes.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Ms. Fraga,
Yes.
Mr. Williamson,
Yes.
Ms. Sachs.
Yes.
The ordinance passes unanimously. And just public service announcement here for anybody who didn't tune in at the very top of the meeting. I did want to let folks know that the last two ordinances that are listed here on the agenda, 2020-21 and 2020-22, the ordinances related to the Princeton Shopping Center, we are going to be holding the public hearing for those. We're moving it to the meeting of August 27th. God, I keep saying August, sorry, July 27th. Thank you. In 2 weeks, based on some of the comments the planning board received on Thursday night. So if you're here for those ordinances, you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but just to let you know, the public hearing will not be for another 2 weeks. Okay, next is Ordinance 2020-20, an ordinance to amend Chapter 10B of the Princeton Code entitled Land Use and the Princeton Zoning Map to create AH4 affordable housing for residential district and the regulations associated thereto in the municipality of Princeton. And this ordinance pertains to Princeton, the existing Princeton community village development. And again, Mr. Sullivan, can you walk us through this ordinance?
Sure. I will first show you where this is located. For those folks who don't know, this is the Princeton Community Village site. And that's where this ordinance will be effective. So the AH4 is a new zone that is replacing the existing zoning where Princeton Community Village is situated. And what it does is, in addition to creating Princeton Community Village as a permitted use at this point, because it's in a zone that doesn't permit residential uses, it also allows for Princeton Community Village to develop 25 additional units there. And the bulk standards are largely based around the fact that there's existing development here and how these new units might fit in to that, the existing plan, so that it's one complex, so that it's one campus. The parking spaces are 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit, which is less than, slightly less than what the residential site improvement standards would permit. And because of the existing character of the campus and the anticipated nature of how these new dwellings would fit in based on what when we've talked to the folks at Princeton Community Village, there are some exemptions in this ordinance to ensure that they do have the ability to develop these new units. And that is that there is an exemption from the tree preservation and mitigation section of the ordinance. There's an exemption from the steep slope section of the ordinance, and it's really related to the fact that they're anticipating the creation of steeper slopes in the development because it's tight. And then because they have existing parking lots, an exemption from shade trees and the provision within existing parking lots because they do not feel that they'd be able to actually supply the parking needed if they had to integrate all that. So while those exemptions exist, it doesn't negate the ability of the municipality and the planning board during the site plan process to look for ways to find ways to get green into these areas and to look for areas for plant material and things like that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments or questions from council before we open up the public hearing? Okay, I'm going to open up the public hearing and I'm going to put this comment in there. This is from someone anonymous. I mean, in general, we prefer if it's a public hearing to put your name on it, but given this is virtual, I'm gonna let it slide. So hi there, just to follow up, I made my comment about growth in general, so it's not specific to affordable housing. If tree cover is such an obvious goal, can folks help me understand the seeming absence of trees on the current Avalon Bay development on the former hospital grounds? I admit I may be missing them. Maybe future planning meetings are a better time to pursue this. I'm excited about multifamily housing. I'd like to add, thanks so much. I think this ordinance in particular might be an area where we can explain what it normally is, because I guess Princeton Community Housing is getting a bit of exemption from the tree ordinance. But in general, how it works is if you want to put in a development and there's a tree where you want to build, depending on how big that tree is, you're required to, if it needs to be removed in order to put in the building structure. Number one, usually you're encouraged to try to figure out a way to save the tree and build around it. But if that's not feasible, there's a replacement requirement. So depending on the size of the tree, you have different requirements for replacement trees. And if you're not able to put those replacement trees on the property, you have to pay money into the municipality's tree fund. And you can find a copy. I don't know if anybody wants to add more detail to that, but you can find a copy of the municipality's shade tree ordinance on our website under the Shade Tree Commission. Ms. Dietergang?
I do have a quick, actually more of a question than a comment, like thinking about the hospital site, or for example, Planet or other sites on which there are no trees already existing. What is the obligation, or is that something that gets settled when the development comes before the planning board? If there aren't trees to cut down, but you build something new, what is the obligation, if any?
I mean, I don't have a complete answer to that, but I did want to mention that one of the exemptions that we're giving to PCV here relates to shade trees in parking lots. And there is a separate requirement to have parking lots be shaded, Eve. So at the very least, those will be required for any of the new developments, even if not a single tree was coming down. Beyond that, I'm not really sure that we have, I mean, we have buffer planting requirements in many cases where development is adjacent to another residential use, and there are requirements for planting trees that will screen between the two developments. But I can't think of anything that requires some kind of ratio of trees per square foot of building or anything like that.
Are there any other,
Mayor,
well, I guess we're still in the public hearing. So have any other comments come in for 2020-20?
there's one more comment, I believe, and that's I just sent over to you from Juan.
Is this from, oh, that's for a resolution. Oh, yes. This is from Juan Polanco, comment for ordinance 2020-20. My name is Juan Polanco. I live in Princeton Community Village. I've been a resident of Princeton since 2005, thanks to affordable housing. I would like to thank all members of the council for the countless hours you have spent on the affordable housing mandate. Your work does not go unnoticed. I am writing to express my full support of ordinance 2020-20. While I know this will change the characteristics of my neighborhood, I also understand that the material impact for future residents will be far greater. Please vote in support of this ordinance. Okay, and there's some other comments that came in, and I just feel like I'd like to get them into the record, even though they're a little more general than just this ordinance. But since they came in, this is from Nat Bottenheimer, 26 White Pine Lane. I am writing to urge the council to give the highest priority to expediting plans and projects that will expand housing opportunity for households across the broadest possible range of household income categories. I also urge the council to give the highest priority to funding and permitting housing in parts of the town that are already walkable, have shops, and have easy access to transit services without needing access to an auto. Permitting ADUs, reducing parking minima, and eliminating other restrictions on production of housing on existing single-family homes. Thank you very much. And this next one comes from No Name. As a resident of affordable housing, I wanted to reach out to shine light on the importance of integrating more affordable housing. Our family had bounced around from home to home, waiting on the long list, ultimately reaching acceptance on the affordable housing list. As a family of 8, this greatly impacted our lives, and I hope no family should feel the stress we endured throughout the waiting process. Okay. I just want to bring it back, and I'm going to close the public hearing for this ordinance and ask if there are any final comments or questions from council? Ms. Fraga, did you want to move to approve? Okay,
That's why I raised my hand. I move
excellent.
to
And
approve.
A second.
seconded by Mr. Williamson. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Peron Lambros,
Yes.
Ms. Niedergang,
Yes.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Ms. Fraga,
Yes.
Mr. Williamson,
Yes.
Ms. Sacks.
Yes.
All right, and this ordinance also passes unanimously. So I want to thank everybody who made comments tonight. We're not done yet, so don't go. But I want to thank everybody who made comments tonight, and I also want to take a minute too. And this is work product for many years, and I want to thank the current council members, and I also want to thank council members who are no longer on council, but who helped on the initial efforts to get the ball rolling on all of these ordinances. So thank you. And thank you to Michael Sullivan and to Michael Laplace also. This is a multi-person effort, so we appreciate everyone's help, and also to Maureen Fullaway too, our fearless leader on affordable housing. Thank you. Okay, next we come to ordinance introductions tonight. The first is a break from affordable housing for a minute. Ordinance 2020-23 bond ordinance providing for various capital improvements in and by Princeton in the county of Mercer, New Jersey, appropriating $6,600,000 therefore, and authorizing the issuance of $5,855,000 bonds or notes of Princeton to finance part of the cost thereof. And this ordinance, I'm going to ask Mr. DeShield to walk us through the specifics, but just overview is that this will enable the purchase of body-worn cameras for our police department, something that we've been working on with our police department for quite a while, and they've been doing a pilot project with the equipment, and it also includes bonding for several infrastructure projects that we are also receiving grant funding for. And we wanted to make sure that we would move forward with the bonding on municipalities and to release those grant funds. And Mr. DeShield, I'm sure to walk us through any more specifics, and then we can see if there's any comments and take a vote.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. As the Mayor indicated, this ordinance has a number of capital improvements. They include, importantly, the acquisition of the body cameras for the police department. They're also included in this ordinance or the infrastructure projects. Those include the Hilltop Park improvements that is additionally funded through a county at play grant. There's also the Witherspoon Street improvements, and that will be supplemented by state DOT grant. There's also for improvements at the solar field where the landfill is. There are some reconstruction of the drainage swells that need to happen in accordance with DEP regulations, and that needs to happen this summer. Consequently, that is on the in the ordinance. And then finally, it's Rosedale Road improvements, and those are also supplemented by grants, and those will be the Safe Routes to School grant. We'll be supplementing those grants. Do you have any questions?
Are there any questions for Mr. DeShield? Ms. Pearl-Lambros?
Yeah, a question and then a comment. On the Hilltop Park improvement, what was the grant funding that was available, Mr. DeShield?
The grant funding was $500,000.
Okay, so
That was county. That's a county grant.
Right.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I just wanted to make a comment that I think, well, two things. I mean, one is that the moving forward with the acquisition of the body cameras, we've talked about that, and I really think given particularly the situation today. I just think that this is a protection for our residents and a protection for the officers. And I think it's something that was really critical. And, we discussed this at public safety, given the fact that we are looking very closely at the budget and line items and what we could cut, we really felt very strongly that we needed to move forward with the body cameras. So thank you. Thank you for moving this forward.
Thank you. And I also, I completely agree with Ms. Pearl-Lambros. And I also want to thank Ms. Stockton for writing the bulk of the applications that got us these really great grant opportunities for the infrastructure projects. So thank you for your hard work and for helping to get the funding to improve our infrastructure. Anybody else on this? All right, so just to explain to, I know we have a lot of folks that are tuning in tonight. What happens with the ordinances is the first meeting, we introduce the ordinance. Then at a subsequent meeting, we'll actually hold the public hearing and the vote. So the vote that we're about to take is just to introduce the ordinance. It hasn't passed until we have the public hearing, which we can't have tonight. We have to have at a subsequent meeting. So with that, I will ask if there's a motion to introduce. Moved by Ms. Pearl-Lambros, seconded by Ms. Niedergang. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Pearl-Lambros,
Yes.
Ms. Niedergang,
Yes.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Ms. Fraga,
Yes.
Mr. Williamson,
Yes.
Ms. Sachs.
Yes.
Okay, so the ordinance has been introduced and the public hearing will be on July 27th, 2020. Next is ordinance 2020-24, an ordinance to amend and supplement chapter 17A, article 11 of the Princeton Code entitled Land Use and the Princeton zoning map to create an AH6 affordable housing 6 zone and the regulations associated thereto in the municipality of Princeton, which is on the Franklin and Maple site. And in a lot of ways, this ordinance is sort of like a two-sided coin of the next ordinance, 2020-25, but I think we have to take them sequentially. So we'll start with this one. And Mr. Sullivan, do you want to walk us through this one? And we also have Leighton Newland from the Housing Authority who wanted to make a comment as well. But why don't we start with Mr. Sullivan and then we can hear from Mr. Newland.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. This project is right here at the juncture of the former borough and the former township along Witherspoon Street. And the ordinance itself is fairly simple. Pursuant to the settlement, this site at the corner of near Franklin and Maple is slated to be a 100% affordable municipally sponsored development. And that means that there's no inclusionary development. It's all affordable housing. And it's usually developed with a experienced affordable housing developer using low-income housing tax credit financing, at least in part, to develop it. It requires 80 dwelling units to be developed here to be consistent with the settlement and the housing plan element. This permits, in all likelihood, this would be a single building development. From what I know about 100% projects of this size, and that this ordinance would permit this building to be 3.5 stories and up to 45 feet high. It's very simple. It's got some bulk requirements that provide for a buffer adjacent to the residential zones and some small setbacks, but giving as much flexibility as reasonable to allow a building such as that to be sited on this property.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Michael before we hear from Mr. Newland? Okay, so Mr. DeShield, can you help?
Wait, Liz, I'm a little confused. Are we not mentioning both of the two overlays or the two options?
Yeah,
For,
maybe we should, well,
I think we have to mention both first because it's
Okay.
not, I think the comments will be out of context then.
okay, why don't we take them both at once
I'm gonna-
then? So then then there's also ordinance 2020-25, an ordinance to amend and supplement chapter 17A, article 11 of the Princeton Code entitled Land Use in the Princeton Zoning Map to create an AH06 affordable housing overlay 6 zone and the regulations associated thereto in the municipality of Princeton. And this applies to the Franklin Maple site and also the housing authority, the Franklin lot and Maple plus the housing authority site. So Mr. Sullivan, you can walk us through that one as well, and then we'll hear from Mr. Newland.
Certainly. The AH06 overlay, and we talked about overlay ordinances before, this is an alternative, optional alternative at that site, but it adds, it uses the AH6 properties, but it also adds the housing authority site, which is lot 2 for this. It requires comprehensive development of the entire tract as one development plan. And what this does is it allows for more density, up to 160 dwelling units of mixed income housing, and it requires at least 80 affordable housing dwelling units. But what's different about this too is that it envisions the corner at Witherspoon as a ground floor commercial node. And so what this ordinance does is it builds in a requirement that you can have up to 10,000 square feet of commercial retail services and other types of uses that would be something that folks in the neighborhood would like. But it also anchors them to the Witherspoon Street frontage. So it's a continuation of the higher order street there. And it requires a storefront, at least one storefront on Witherspoon, which if you looked at the property is probably how it would be developed if you're going to allow commercial here. It allows a maximum building height of 5 stories and up to 55 feet because there's a potential for podium style building, which might have parking slid underneath at some level. And it requires 1 parking space per dwelling unit, which is much lower than the RSIS standards. And it requires no parking spaces for the commercial, recognizing that this is probably going to be a neighborhood business type of operation here. So, and I agree that this really needs to be looked at in tandem with the AH6. What this does is it pulls through the requirements from the settlement plan for the 80 units, but it allows for a more robust and more density in terms of the residential development, but also brings in the commercial component, which isn't in the underlying AH6.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Michael on this? Ms. Sachs?
Yeah, I want to explain because I think that, the public might be confused that what's happening here is these 2 ordinances are in their original settlement, we had a plan for 80 units of affordable housing on 2 lots. And subsequent to that, we have been working on the idea of doing a mixed income project on that site. And it would be 3 lots rather than 2 lots. And so I know there were some concerns about the number of 160 units here. That's a ceiling. So basically what we're doing here is voting on the documentation that we need to comply with our court mandate, with our court settlement and our affordable housing mandate, while at the same time keeping all our options on the table, which range from 80 units of 100% affordable housing on 2 lots to 160 units of housing, which would be 80 units of affordable, 80 of market rate on 3 lots. And everything within that spectrum is on the table we're not deciding it tonight, or even when this comes to the hearing. We're not deciding that before the court settlement. All we're doing tonight is voting to make sure that all the options will still be available to us. So I just want to make that clear, because otherwise it could be confusing.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments before we hear from Mr. Newland from the Princeton Housing Authority? Okay. Is Leighton still on here?
Yes, Mayor.
Excellent. All right. I don't know if we're going to get to see your face or not, but you can go ahead and
Well, thank you and good evening. Thank you for allowing me to make a statement on behalf of the Princeton Housing Authority's Board of Commissioners. For over 80 years, the Princeton Housing Authority has functioned historically as the affordable housing option for the most vulnerable and disenfranchised individuals and families in Princeton. Over this time, 236 units have been maintained to the best of our ability, with all now in need of rehabilitation, some more than others. In our long history, the PHA and its Board of Commissioners has never really experienced the opportunity to dream of a better time for the constituents we serve, or even to have a positive outlook for their future. At a critical time when our national focus rests with a struggle for equity in our systems and in our country, not on one level, but on all levels, we are excited that the town of Princeton has engaged the PHA with an opportunity to adjust its financial and sustainable trajectory through an urban development project and partnership. This partnership will allow the PHA to rehouse 20 families currently residing at Maple Franklin, which was built in the 1930s and 40s, and is quite possibly the most underutilized parcel of land in central Princeton. This economic development opportunity will also allow us to participate in a project that will enable us to begin the process of rehabilitating other units in our portfolio and give us more options for future growth and to enhance our ability to provide additional low income housing. We are committed to smart growth and smart design. We are also committed to our constituency, which is largely African American and serves many generational families. We are 100% local and we live here. We care about our neighbors and our neighborhood. We are sensitive to neighborhood concerns and the impact on our schools. We wish to engage in a dialogue with transparency and honesty. We firmly believe that working together in collaboration, we can incorporate a community within a community that is well designed and pleases the people that will live there, the neighboring community that surrounds it, and the town of Princeton, which we all call home. Thank you, Mayor and Council, and God bless you.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Leighton.
Well put. Okay, so if there are no other questions or comments, just want to remind everybody when council votes on these ordinances tonight, it's a vote to introduce them, and they will be coming back for a public hearing on July 27th. Ms.
Yeah,
Sachs,
there
did
are
you want to
two-
say something?
Yeah, there are two comments. Stephanie Chorney's comment and also the school board president, Beth Barrand, has submitted a comment.
Okay, thank you for reminding me about that. Let's see. Here somewhere. Okay, here we go. This is from Stephanie Chorney, Race Street. I wanted to comment on 3 issues facing the town regarding new housing requirements for Princeton. 1, I am in favor of the mixed affordable market rate unit plan on Franklin Street, even with higher density. I am relieved that it is not all affordable housing grouped together, and I think the neighborhood can accommodate the density. I can see Avalon Bay from my house, and we all thought that Avalon Bay would be the worst thing in the world with the density, creating an unsightly view and more traffic. In the end, it does not look that nice or conform to the sustainability standards that we wanted, but it certainly could be worse. Not that that is the low bar we are aiming for, but it has not created more traffic or congestion. In fact, Witherspoon Street seems very empty at times compared to before with the hospital. I can support a multi-level structure instead of a parking lot almost in my backyard that will provide much needed housing for people in Princeton, hopefully some commercial space for the public, some walk-through and recreation areas, and more people biking and walking to town. I'm just going to read this whole email, even though not all of it is 100% pertinent to this ordinance. Number 2, I think the shopping center is also another good location for additional housing. Again, the parking lot is not so beautiful as is, and providing a place where more people can live, work, and bike and walk to town and surrounding open space would be helpful. Number 3, all of this, however, is just as crucial as having council diligently working towards ordinancing many of the items recently passed by the planning board under the green buildings and environment sustainability element of the master plan to better ensure that new buildings in our town conform to the standards that we have asked. Let there be as little wiggle room as possible for developers on the things that we hold most important to us, like creating a community that helps to mitigate the effects of climate change, not worsen it. Okay, and then it sounds like Mr. DeShield, an email came in.
Should be at the top of your email.
Okay.
Actually, it didn't go through. Hold on one second. One second, Mayor. My internet went down a little over here.
Okay.
I'm going to send it to you, Liz, right now. Hold on.
I apologize to everybody for the technical issues here. We are going to try, hopefully, to roll out a new system at our next meeting where we can have people read their own comments. Okay, here we go. This is from Beth Barrand, president of the Princeton Board of Education, Princeton Public Schools. To the members of the Princeton Council, the Princeton Board of Education values our diverse and vibrant community and appreciates the work of the council to provide much needed housing while being mindful of the related impact on our public schools. Tonight, we would simply like to remind council members and the public of the need to consider the full costs, including new and/or expanded public school facilities and increased operating costs within a mandated 2% levy cap, each time a decision is made to enable increases in the density of our local housing stock. Bob Powell, a citizen expert who has volunteered his advice on school impact, estimated that the original affordable housing settlement proposal would have increased public school enrollments by 329 students. As you know, the board has been advised by architects and planners that our public schools are currently at or approaching full capacity. We understand that tonight's ordinances include a new proposal that could potentially double the residential units to be built on the Franklin site from 80 to 160 units. According to Mr. Powell, this change could potentially result in an additional 45 children in the Princeton Public Schools. We understand that the Nassau Street overlay was also revised to increase density, but have not yet estimated the additional potential school impact of that change. Given the board's responsibility to provide our students with safe and appropriate learning spaces at a price taxpayers can afford, we comment tonight to remind you of the impact that the council's decisions have on the facilities and operations of our excellent public schools. We also remind you that even if property tax rateables in Princeton increase significantly year to year due to additional residential development, the state mandated school spending cap does not necessarily permit the board to access these additional revenues above a 2% increase over the prior year to support the cost of educating additional students. We look forward to continuing to engage and collaborate with you and our community on these growth-related shared challenges. Okay, and it looks like there's a couple more comments that came in on the Q&A. The first is from Kip Cherry. I am very glad that you are going with mixed income here, but I'm also concerned that this apparently has meant doubling the number of units. I'm very concerned that 160 units, taking the two pieces together, is too much density for the location. I also question the parking determination that concludes that the retail will not need parking. I recall a presentation by the owner of the local hair salon down the street and the emphasis she put on the need for fairly short-term parking for her clientele. Many who live locally but are seniors who are not up to walking that far. Another eye-opener in this presentation a few years ago was the effort the owner has taken to provide parking behind the building for her employees to meet their needs. And then the other is from Michael Floyd. If you were taking comments, why not read my email to council? Up to now, I've respected the process of no comments for ordinance introductions.
Mike, can you put, that letter is extremely long. Can you write some comments? Can you?
Well, I was
that?
also going to say that we will also be holding a public hearing in 2 weeks too. I'm not reading every piece of mail that has come in to, I'm not reading the mail that's come into me or to the council members, but the ones that have come into either Q&A or the Gmail account where we're accepting comments for the meeting. Okay. I'm just going to give it another beat. Sorry, I got it. Meeting went. Can people hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
The meeting went too long and my earpieces stopped working. Okay, so I'm gonna take it back to council at this point, unless there's other emails, and we will take each of these ordinances up separately. So we'll start with the first one, Ordinance 2020-24. And this is for the AH6 Affordable Housing Zone. And is there a motion to introduce?
Moved.
Moved by Mr. Williamson, seconded by Ms. Niedergang. Any final comments on this one? All right, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Perron Lambros,
Yes.
Ms. Niedergang,
Yes.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Ms. Fraga,
Yes.
Mr. Williamson,
Yes.
Ms. Sachs.
Yes.
And the ordinance has been introduced. The public hearing will be on July 27th, 2020. And next we'll take up Ordinance 2020-25. This is the ordinance for the overlay zone. Is there a motion to introduce? Moved by Ms. Fraga, seconded by Ms. Perron Lambros. Any final comments on this ordinance? All right, Madam Clerk, please read the roll.
Ms. Perone Lambros,
Yes.
Ms. Niedergang,
Yes.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Ms. Fraga,
Yes.
Mr. Williamson,
Yes.
Ms. Sacks.
Yes.
This ordinance has also been introduced, and the public hearing for this ordinance will also be on July 27th, 2020. So we invite you back to that meeting. Now we come to resolutions. We've already taken up the first resolution. So now we come to 20-224 resolution of the Council of the Municipality of Princeton, Mercer County, New Jersey, of intent to fund spending plan shortfall for affordable housing programs in the municipality's housing element and fair share plan. And just to get this resolution on the table, can I have a motion to approve in a second, and then we'll discuss? Moved by Ms. Niedergang, seconded by Ms. Perone Lambros. Who can speak to this one? Mr. Sullivan? Or,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, this is a required component of your affordable housing spectrum of tools. This says that your spending plan anticipates a certain amount of funding that's going to come into it through developer fees and other mechanisms. And what you're required to do is that there's a municipal backstop for those funds. And should those funds not be able to cover your affordable housing costs in terms of what you're planning on spending, then you would bond for those funds.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions on this resolution or comments? All right. I saw there was a comment that came in, but I think it's really pertaining to the next resolution, so I'm going to hold it for then. So all in favor?
Aye.
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 Did everybody vote? Okay.
I think I did.
All right. Any opposed? Okay, the resolution passes unanimously. Next, we come to 2225, resolution of the Council of the Municipality of Princeton adopting the Princeton Home Improvement Program operating manual for the Municipality of Princeton. And again, to get it on the floor, can we get a motion to approve in a second? Moved by Mr. Williamson, seconded by Ms. Perone Lambros. Mr. Sullivan, can you explain this one as well?
It looked like Maureen was going to
Oh,
step.
Maureen, oh, sorry, Ms. Followay.
Yeah, so Princeton has an 80-unit housing rehabilitation component for its third round plan. And the housing rehabilitation manual is really a blueprint for how we advertise this program. It's going to be open municipally wide to anybody who meets low and moderate income guidelines as a way to abate health, safety, and code violations on their properties, increase efficiency of heating systems, air conditioning systems, etc. It will be a deferred loan. It will be in effect for 10 years, no interest, no monthly payments. At the end of 10 years, it will be forgiven. And the principal will be prorated downward at the rate of 10% a year. So it is a very attractive program, and we are trying to reach our goal of 80 units. Okay.
For people who are interested, do they call your office or how do they take advantage?
We're going to be advertising the program. So we'll try to get it on our website. We'll try to do municipalities, Facebook, etc., to get the word out that the program is up and running. We haven't been up and running to this point, but now we will.
Okay, great. Are there any questions or comments for Ms. Holloway? Okay, I'm going to read the comment that came in. This is from Maria Huega, 66 River Avenue. Dear Mayor and Council, in connection to the Affordable Housing Rental and Sales Manual
and the Home Improvement Manual, there are a number of inconsistencies and not sufficiently explicit statements that need revision. The Rentals Manual lacks specificity in a number of areas, such as the kind of data to be gathered and reports that the Affordable Housing Liaison should provide and to whom. Presumably, it is implied that this process would be guided and overseen by the Affordable Housing Board, which in turn would relay this information to Mayor and Council. But there is no clarity in the manual as to the exact mandate. In fact, the whole mandate of the Affordable Housing Board should be reconsidered and revised since the existing language makes now obsolete COA references. Also, the manual is overly broad and too vague in a number of aspects, including what requirements can landlords reasonably demand from prospective tenants, and what is the appeals process for applicants who are rejected. In the Home Improvement Manual, the loan forgiveness schedule on page 7 conflicts with that on Appendix E. The list of acceptable improvements on pages 6 and 8 does not include modifications for handicapped access, which are explained in Appendix E. I don't think these concerns are significant enough to hold off on their approval tonight, but I would recommend the Council task the Affordable Housing Board to perform a comprehensive review of these manuals and internal processes and submit updated manuals for Council's approval by year end. These comments are solely mine and are not made on behalf of the Affordable Housing Board in which I serve. Okay, well, that seems a reasonable request to have the Affordable Housing Board take another look at these manuals, and if they want to make additional recommendations to Council, that can come to the
Mayor, yeah, the Affordable Housing Board is planning to take a look at some of what Maria just mentioned. These were planned even before she mentioned them. So, right, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions on this? Oh my gosh, wait, looks like there's more things that have come in on the Q&A. Oh, I think that was it. Okay. All right, in that case, this is already on the table. So if there's no further comments, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so this resolution passes, and next is resolution 20-226, resolution of the Council of the Municipality of Princeton adopting a Princeton Affordable Housing Rental and Sales Operating Manual for the Municipality of Princeton. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move.
Ms. Fraga, seconded by Ms. Niedergang. Any questions or comments on this?
I do, and I brought it up before. I'm not sure if it pertains to this resolution. I understand that the Affordable Housing Board was looking into some guidelines for mixed income, mixed status families. And I wondered whether there would be guidance, this manual would include guidance on that.
At this point, we have had a subcommittee looking into mixed status families. We don't have conclusions yet because we don't feel comfortable yet with the alternatives to credit checks and criminal background checks. So we're not at the point that we want to make a recommendation yet, but we're still certainly looking into it.
Okay, and I have a follow-up question. So this rental and sales operating manual, would this apply to any development that has affordable housing that we expected them to follow this manual? Because from my understanding in the past that it's been, and I'm glad that we're adopting this because I understand in the past there has been confusion from when there's applicants that may be told one thing and may have even been denied when in fact they were eligible because perhaps the person who was reviewing the application was not following correct guidelines. But if it's something that is going to be uniform and hopefully would include training if it's if it's affordable housing that is being managed by different developments.
Yeah, so all of our administrative agents will be required to follow the protocol that's in the sales and rental manual. Moving forward, we're not planning on any new sales, but we will be still doing resales on our existing units. So the bulk of this will apply to rental units that are developed as part of the third round plan.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Niedergay?
I just wanted to express, I think from all of us, our deep appreciation to Maureen Fullaway for her dedication and her incredible hard work. I did not read every detail of these manuals, but just the amount of work that went into it, just an astronomical task. And thank you for being there, for answering our questions, and for, you know, your dedication. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Sachs?
Yeah, since we're expressing gratitude, I just wanted to thank both of our attorneys, Kevin Van Heist and Trishka Cecile, because I know people see the work product that goes into the packet, which is thousands of pages. And if you can imagine, extrapolate from that, the amount of questions that we've had during this process. And it's actually a very intense and emotional process, because it's so important for the town, and because it involves, it involves major changes to opportunities for many people, but also, there's it does cause a lot of anxiety for others who already live here. So, and our attorneys have been so incredibly supportive, and so we're really very grateful for their support. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the comments. It's been quite the process. So thank you.
Yes, I'll echo what Kevin said. Thank you.
Still going. All right. Any other comments on this resolution? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, resolution passes unanimously. Okay.
I'm going to excuse myself from the meeting because I think that's the last of the affordable housing.
It is. All right.
And I'm going to do as well.
Almost before
Thank you.
9:30. All right. Bye.
I'll say
We'll-
goodnight.
Bye, Kevin. Bye, Michael.
We'll see you on the 27th.
Bye,
Thank
Maureen.
you.
Bye-bye.
Boy, they couldn't wait to leave us.
Yeah. Okay. We did get a comment in the interim from Kip Cherry, who's correcting a comment that she made earlier about parking. And it was, she was referring to the owner of a nail salon. I'm not sure what she said. Maybe she said a hair salon, but it was, I think she called it a hair salon, but it's really a nail salon that she was referring to. Okay. Next is resolution 20-227. Resolution authorizing a payment of $144,500 to the Princeton Public Schools for 2019-2020 school year hazardous busing transportation costs. And is there a motion to approve so we get it on the table? Moved by Mr. Cohen, seconded by Ms. Perron-Lambros. And just to answer the question on everyone's mind, I think this is reduced from what it would have been because of the lack of busing after the school shut down in March. But it didn't go to, the cost did not go down to zero. Ms. Niedergay?
Yeah, that was part of my question. So thank you for, but the resolution is written in the future tense, but it is applying, just to confirm, that to the past school year. Is that
I'm gonna ask
accurate?
Ms. Stockton to answer that question.
Yes, correct. It applies to the 2019-20 year.
Okay, That's what I thought, but again, it was confusing because it talked about it in the future. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions on this resolution? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The virtual voting, I find disconcerting, but I'm assuming somebody's going to scream if they're not voting yes. Okay. Next is 20228, resolution approving professional services agreement with Miller, Porter and Muller, PC, for legal services to the planning board not to exceed $25,000. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Williamson, seconded by Ms. Niedergang. Any questions or comments on this resolution? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, resolution passes unanimously. Next is 20229, resolution authorizing the placement of a trailer-mounted wood-fired pizza oven and associated pizza preparation on the north side of Whole Fish Street in front of the Mediterra restaurant for outdoor food preparation and sales. And to just get it on the table, is there a motion to approve in a second? Moved by Mr. Cohen, seconded by Ms. Pearl-Lambros. Ms. Stockton, I see your face is still there. Did you want to speak about this one?
Sure, I just wanted to give an overview that this is related to the Teresa's restaurant rather than Mediterra. They will be utilizing the kitchen from Mediterra for food preparation and storage. But this is specifically for Teresa's because they are not able to use their brick and mortar location as it's currently under renovation. We've also, just to be clear, we've also included a few conditions with our recommendation, specifically related to if we receive any complaints about the wood fire smoke, that we would require them to relocate or remove the pizza oven.
Okay, great. Ms. Pearl-Lambros?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Ms. Stockton, about the fact that this is connected with Teresa's. And do you have any sense, did you talk to them about the smoke part? I mean, is it something that we are anticipating will be a problem?
We're not aware that they've identified any issues with it, but because there is the residential housing somewhat nearby, we just wanted to make that a condition of the recommendation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for the terrific diagram for both this and the subsequent ordinance. Always really helpful to have the visuals. I appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
Definitely. All right, are there any further questions or comments on this one?
Can I just throw out my thanks again? We're throwing out thanks, and I just want to thank Ms. Stockton and her staff. Have been just tremendous public works as well, getting things done, very responsive, the whole compliance committee. So thank you.
And I also want to thank Councilwoman Lambros, Pearl-Lambros, for really, I don't know what the analogy is, the Pied Piper of Witherspoon Street in the downtown, and really sort of reinventing what outdoor space could be at a time when it's really needed. So it's a team effort, but thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so all in favor of 20229?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, resolution passes unanimously. And the last resolution is 20230, resolution authorizing the change of a 3-hour parking meter near 17 Witherspoon Street to a 30-minute meter for limited stays related to curbside pickup. And can we get that on the floor with a motion and a second? Moved by Ms. Niedergang, seconded by Ms. Pearl-Lambros. And again, Ms. Stockton, can you just give us the background on this one?
Sure. We've been monitoring the success of the curbside pickup areas on Witherspoon Street, and Ms. Pearl-Lambros connected us with all of the business owners last week to follow up and make sure that there weren't any unforeseen issues with making this change. So what we're looking at doing is changing over a 3-hour parking space in front of McLaughlin's. It's at the northern end of the Agricola outdoor dining area. Switching it over to a 30-minute curbside pick or 30-minute limited stay, so that those people that do need to jump out of cars for longer than 10 minutes, which is now what we're allowing in the curbside pickup areas, that they can park in this stall. We're also monitoring what's happening over in the Tulane yard, where we have 2 additional curbside pickup locations. And depending how those work out, we may in the future look to reinstate the 30-minute meters at those 2 parking stalls. Those are the stalls that are in place of the diagonal spaces. We changed them from diagonal to parallel. So that's these changes were just based on feedback we had received from business owners in the area to help make curbside pickup more effective for them.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there any questions or comments on this? I just want to reiterate what Ms. Stockton said for any business owners that might be listening to this, that I think it was a best first attempt, how the parking is arranged in town, and we want to hear comments. And I know Palmer Square has a survey going out right now, but you know, the compliance committee was set up to be a flexible group to make changes as needed. So we want to hear from folks if things are working or not working. Okay, all in. Oh yeah, Ms. Pern-Lambros.
And the businesses on Witherspoon and the businesses in general have been very accommodating and trying to help each other. There's been a real community feeling about trying to make sure that if they're doing well, that their neighbors are doing well, and vice versa. So it's been really nice.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Okay, all in favor of 2230?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, resolution passes unanimously. And next we come to the consent agenda, which contains items of a routine nature passed by single vote. Are there any items on the consent agenda that anybody would like removed from the consent agenda? And if not, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Ms. Niedergang, seconded by Ms. Pern-Lambros. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda passes unanimously. And is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Cohen, seconded by Ms. Niedergang. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody. And again, I want to thank everybody who came out, especially everybody who came out to speak in favor of affordable housing.